You're watching Let the Quran Speak, and now we answer questions from you. If you have a question, visit our website, QuranSpeaks.com. Dr. Shabir, the question we have here is an interesting one. It says, I'm a new Muslim, and I'm finding it very difficult to figure out what's halal and haram in terms of ingredients. When I go to the store, I spend a lot of time looking up ingredients, and it's getting frustrating. Do you have advice about what's haram and what's not? What about things like bread, ice cream, and cheese?
Yeah, so let me start from the bottom, and then we look at more general considerations.
Yes.
The simple thing that Muslims need to bear in mind is that the small ingredients in larger containers of things do not render the whole containers to be impure if the small ingredients themselves are impure. So that's one major consideration. In our classical books of Islamic jurisprudence, we'll find discussions, for example, what if you have a vat of water and then, an animal falls in and dies in that, right? It could be a tiny animal, rodent or whatever. So you take that out. This is what they prescribe. You take that out and take out so many buckets of water from that larger container and add new water to it. So what are they prescribing here? That you're diluting whatever effects have been left in that water due to the impure substance falling into it. But you're not going to condemn the whole vat of water just because of this one little mishap. Okay. If you did, then you would make life impractical for people. So, the scholars were wise enough to see that Islam has this flexibility about it. But common people don't seem to know this. It just seems to them, and sometimes some popular preachers as well would, bandy about some narratives that says, like if something impure, is in there, then it makes the whole thing impure, something of this nature. But practically, this is not easy to live by. And the Sharia, the Islamic law, was never meant to be impractical or stifling. The Quran says very plainly, "Man zalna alayka al-Qur'an litashqa." We didn't reveal the Quran to you to make you miserable. So it's to give us freedom and vitality and, make things practical and easy for us. The Quran says, "Yuridu Allahu bikum al-yusra wa la yuridu bikum al-usra." God desires ease for you, not hardship. Now, coming back to this practical issue, so one consideration is that if it's a small ingredient in the larger whole, that does not render the whole thing impure. Now, if I bring this down to the practical experience of people, let's say you bought a loaf of bread, you cut into it, and you found that there is an ant baked into this bread. What are you going to do? You're going to throw away the whole loaf? No. Common sense tells you you're going to pinch out that part and throw away the ant with a little bit of bread along with it, but you can eat the rest of the bread. It
depends how if someone's squeamish.
Right? Yes, if somebody's squeamish, that's fine. I mean, that's up to you personally.
Yeah.
And of course, depending on your affluence and so on, if to you like $3 for a loaf of bread is no sweat for you to throw away, I mean, that's up to you. But if we're talking about an average person on the ground for whom $3 is a lot of money, and then, they might want to save the bread. So you don't want to come in with Islamic law and says, no, you got to throw away this bread, because then you're going to hurt the person and break their heart and make them feel sorry that they're a Muslim for a moment here. So, I mean, some people respond to this differently and say,
yes,
this is a sacrifice for the sake of God. I will do it and whatever. But when we're talking about Islamic law that has to be applied across the board and to be made accessible to all and everyone, we cannot, go with the highest stricture, nor should we go down to the lowest common denominator, but it should be somewhere balanced in between. So the balance in a thing like this is to say, well, in that case, you just pinch away the piece of bread, throw it away, and you can use the rest. But if you don't want to eat it, nobody's going to force you to eat it. You want to give it away to a poor person, give it away to a food bank, whatever, if that's acceptable to the food bank or whatever. You find it a good way of disposing of it without wasting it, and that's cool. So you're not forced to, but you're not prevented from eating, something like that. So one consideration is that the size of the ingredient relative to the whole. Another consideration is that things change their form over time. Like if there is a slab of meat and you go, pinch off a piece and you eat it, and you know that this meat is impure because it wasn't slaughtered in the proper Islamic manner and so on, then this definitely is haram, impermissible. Nobody will disagree with that. But now you take that pinch of meat and you put it through a chemical process. You transform it. It becomes something else. You look at it, it's no longer a piece of meat. And nobody desires to eat it as a piece of meat. It's fulfilling some other function now, like, to stabilize certain processes, chemical processes that are used for production of food and so on. It's no longer a piece of impure substance that you're eating. Now it's a chemical ingredient. Now we know from classical Islamic law that things may change their nature. A classical example of this is grapes. Grapes by themselves are permissible. If they're pressed into wine, the wine is impermissible. But if the wine changes into vinegar, the vinegar is permissible. And some scholars in some classical law books also gave the example of a donkey falling into a mine. Now, it sounds a little gross, but a donkey may fall into a mine, they say. And I don't know the chemistry about this, but the donkey may actually become salt. And then the salt is permissible. So I know I don't want to gross you out and our viewers, but this is what they said. Of course, they were dealing with situations, that in modern times probably doesn't happen, but they had to be practical as well. So the upshot of all of this is that Islamic law is meant to be practical, and it's not to cater for the absolute elite, nor is it going to go down to the lowest common denominator, but it's going to find a happy medium in between. And the happy medium is to say that on the one hand, if it's a small bit of ingredient, as in a larger container of food, then it doesn't affect the larger container of food. It does not pollute the whole. And it doesn't mean that a Muslim would deliberately say, oh, now I can add a little bit of wine in my cooking because it's a little bit in the whole. No, because a Muslim has no reason to do that. But we're talking about food that's already prepared, already in the market. And on the whole, they appear to be good food, then we will not prevent Muslims from buying those and using those, as opposed to you're deliberately doing it yourself. Because here you have control. On the other hand, you do not have control. Why would you as a Muslim want to add some impure substance? And the second thing is that most of what we're looking at when we read the ingredients are chemical substances that have changed from their original nature. They're no longer an impermissible piece of meat, but they're now some chemical ingredient. And that's permissible by their very nature.
So, Dr. Shabir, what advice would you have to somebody who's going to the store, as this new Muslim is, and wondering, should they check the ingredients? Should they call up the company? Because that's what some Muslims do that, right? They call up the company to find out, is there any animal product in this ice cream, for example, right? So what would you tell a new Muslim?
I can tell them from my own experience. When I was a youth, Safiya, I used to be very particular about things like this. And I used to call up the companies. I used to check the dictionaries for all of these words, what they mean. And in those cases, in those days, internet was not very popular. So I'd be looking up the dictionaries and all. I go to the library to check out the books that have, these ingredients mentioned, to find out the traces of everything. Which of these come from animal sources? I would write to the companies as well to get replies from them. Like, can you clarify what?
Because there was no email then, right? You had to write an actual letter.
Popular, yeah. The upshot of all of this is that at the end of the day, you find that this is a rabbit hole. Like, you go in there and you keep going, one ingredient after another, and one thing becomes ruled out as a result of this kind of search, with those principles in mind. If you want to absolutely avoid anything that has any trace of this, then you start declaring this to be haram and that to be haram and that to be haram. Until it came to milk, when we found that milk contains BHA and BHT, and some of these are linked to animal sources, and I forget the details now, but that drove me to think that all milk is, that's commonly available in the stores, would be impermissible, until somebody said, but goat's milk don't have this. And so I started going to the natural food stores to buy goat's milk, but it was a bit difficult to stomach, and it leaves an after smell that is not easy to live with if you're not accustomed to this. But it wasn't for me. And then it was rumored that an Islamic organization was making money by approving a certain milk, which was then being marketed as though as under the label of halal milk. So that's the extent to which one can go with this if one wants to keep pursuing this. But looking back at this big picture, is this what Islam is meant to be? Like this kind of stricture that makes it so difficult for Muslims to use common and everyday items that are available everywhere? And the answer is no. Islam was meant to be practical. It's not meant to be like this. In fact, the Quran tells us that this is a balanced ummah, balanced community. And the Quran speaking about this says in Surah 2, verse number 143, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. So thus we have made you a middle nation, a balanced nation. And in the 22nd chapter of the Quran, God tells us that He again made this a balanced nation. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ, and has not placed on you any difficulty in religion. So with all of this in mind, we should ask now, where's the balance? Now we know that Islam came in the scene where Judaism and Christianity had already been established. And Judaism is known for its strict rulings, especially in Rabbinic Judaism, where the scholars have worked out detailed rulings in the Mishnah and then eventually in the Talmud. On the other hand, we have Christianity, which has very little rules. Of course, good principles, no doubt, but in terms of legal rulings, very few compared with Judaism. Now, Islam was meant to be the balanced and middle way. Where's the middle way between these two? The liberalism of Christianity and the strictures and legalism of Judaism is supposed to be somewhere in the middle. But somehow it looks like Muslims are tending towards going to the legalism of Judaism. And we have to stop ourselves at that point and ask, where's the balance? So the balance is to, yes, avoid the things which are clearly impure.
And which are those things, Dr. Shabir?
Like, for example, the Quran tells us, إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةَ وَالدَّمَ وَلَحْمَ الْخِنْزِيرِ وَمَا أُحِلَّ بِهِ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ. God has only made forbidden for you the dead meat and the dam, blood, and the flesh of swine, and that which has been dedicated to other than God, meaning when people slaughter, they slaughter on the altars to honor their gods. So these are the four things that are forbidden. Now, clearly, if you go eating one of these things, that's forbidden. But if, when you talk about the little ingredients in foods, these are not to be given the same kind of ruling. It's not, you can't equate one with the other. Clearly, you have a piece of forbidden meat, and now you have an ingredient, and you're asking about this ingredient. The meat, there is no question about it. Now,
what about gelatin, Dr. Shabir?
So gelatin, people have said that, okay, the gelatin does not change its nature, like it remains, the chemical composition of the animal from which it is taken. But that does not affect the other part, which is that it is a small ingredient in a larger container of material. And so you don't let this small ingredient affect and pollute the whole. You don't consider the whole to be polluted because of the small ingredient. I want to end, we can go on and on about this, but I'll end here on a point which I think will wrap it up. The Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, prefacing the whole discussion about what is forbidden in terms of food, says, Ya ayyuhan nasu kulu min ma fil ardi halalan tayyiba. O humankind, eat of whatever is on the earth that is halal and tayyib. Halal means permissible, and tayyib means good. But it also has the connotation of eat whatever is in the earth, considering them to be halal and tayyib. Okay? Mm-hmm. That these are permissible and they are good. More to the point, the 5th chapter of the Quran, the 5th verse, Al-yawma uhilla lakum at-tayyibat. Today, all good things have been declared to be permissible for you. Mm-hmm. So tayyibat, this means things which are good. Putting these two verses together, because the first one was addressed to all humankind, it seems to me that what the Quran is saying here is that there are two basic ways of evaluating whether something is good for Muslims. At one level, there is what all people will agree to be good and wholesome and pure. But a Muslim will have another level, a religious level, which says, okay, based on our religious law, even though this thing looks good, like the two pieces of meat look the same, the one that is slaughtered by a Muslim, the one that is not slaughtered by a Muslim. Okay, so they look the same, but I'm only going to eat the one that's slaughtered by the Muslim. So there's no scientific reason for the two. It's just a religious reason that differentiates between the two. But now, looking at it with this two-level approach, we can see that there are things that people in general will consider good and pure and wholesome. So you go to the store, it wouldn't be in a modern store in a modern democratic nation if it was not good and pure and wholesome in the eyes of the public. All kinds of regulatory bodies will make sure that this is good and pure and wholesome and safe and healthy and so on for the public, right? And then the Muslim will be discriminating based on religious considerations. So now, what are the religious considerations? The religious considerations is what we will find very plainly mentioned in the Quran or in an authentic narrative going back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and speaking clearly about the issue. You see, for something to be forbidden, it must be clear. Every lawmaker knows this. You make a clear law and you publicize it widely, and then when people violate the law, that is when they're penalized for it. God, too, being fair and just and balanced, gives us laws which are clear in the Quran, and when we violate those after they have been pronounced clearly, that's when we are held responsible. So either God in the Quran has made it plain, or the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, clearly gave an edict against something, declaring it to be forbidden. When we're talking about little ingredients, these are in fact a modern phenomenon that meat has been changed to these, or animal extracts have been changed into these ingredients. It wasn't there in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. One is really exercising judgment. It's a modern person that is really saying that all of these things are impermissible. That's a very important consideration. We do not find in the book of God or in the clear statements of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, anything that would clearly delineate any of these modern ingredients to be impermissible. So we do not really have a clear religious mandate to take this thing which is pure by itself and declare it to be impure. Oh, but you go to the meat counter and you see that, okay, the meat there looks good and pure and wholesome to any individual except the Muslim, but the Muslim now has a religious reason for saying this is impure for me.
Okay.
It's impure because clearly in the Quran, the God has forbidden us from eating the things which are classified under dead meat, or the meat of swine, or blood, or that which has been dedicated to other than God.
All right, we'll leave it at that, Dr. Shabir. That was very interesting. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiya and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.